Welcome back to the General Tire Jim Beaver Show. Joined on the line by my good friend Ron Capsu. Ron, I don't know if you could ride a crazier November than what you've had, man, but I guess all is good right now in Ron Cap's world.
Yeah, Jim, you and I talked pretty much this time last year, I think, and I was going into team ownership kind of not knowing what was ahead of even, to sort of navigate being a team owner and a driver. And you couldn't have scripted last year. I mean, to have the opportunity to go in as an owner, but to win a championship like we did last year in 2021 and knowing I was going to go into being a team owner was kind of a cool thing that I don't think I could have ever imagined happening. But then you take it a step further this year and to do it and win a world championship our first year as a team owner and go back to back. I couldn't even fathom having such a great year like we had this year, or that final race in Pomona, even having that play out was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I'm trying to think, it was the end of last year, beginning of this year when we talked, but and you mentioned back-to-back, and I'm like, last year was an amazing year for you guys, and to go and then to switch to your own team, I mean, it's one of those where you think, all right, this is going to take a year or two to get on our feet sometimes, but back-to-back, and I think you were the first driver in Funny Car in 20 years to go back-to-back. And I mean, to me, I guess everybody remembers the John Force years, and not to, say that we're still not, John can't win or anything like that. But I'm like, there was that era there where it was like back-to-back. It was John Force all the time. But, man, first time in 20 years and with a new team, I mean, it's pretty wild, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously I grew up a huge John Force fan, so to get to race him as much as I do now is pretty cool. And he's one of my better friends. That we just talked about that yesterday, me and the team, about his dominance in those amount of years. And what's funny is my crew chief, last year and this year, Dean Antonelli, we call him Guido, he worked on that John Force car for many years. He was a crew member, and that's kind of how we met. When I first became a rookie in Top Fuel, I worked on the car as well as drove it, and I drove the 18-wheeler Guido, and I met because, I grew up working on him, and he was a crew member in John Force's, and we met on the road, and I was driving for kind of a privateer owner at the time, and those guys took me under their wing, and we followed them around the country, and they let me kind of hang on to them and learned where to go to get the dry cleaning done and where to go eat, and just places that they were experienced being, the John Force team of that era. And that's how we started our friendship. And now look at us. We're a driver and owner, I guess owner and crew chief now. But, you fast forward, those were the days. I mean, John Force so dominant. So to do that first time in 20 years is, oh, my gosh. I keep forgetting it. It hasn't even sunk in until you mentioned it.
Yeah. Well, and, I kind of want to jump all over because you and I have talked a lot, and I want to get back to this year, but I want to you mentioned something. I kind of want to go back to the beginning. Because some people come into NHRA, I don't want to say later in life, but you were born into drag racing. I mean, you've been around drag racing your entire life, but it's interesting to me where you talked about being on privateer teams. There's so many times in NHRA where I talk with people and, they didn't start out as a driver. They started out working for a team and wrenching and things like that, and then the opportunity popped up to drive, and it wasn't like they wanted to be a driver. They just didn't know how to get to that point, and it was the right place, right time, and slowly kind of transitioned into being a driver and things like that. But your career, some people come into racing on their own, but I mean, you were kind of born into it, right? I mean, you were been at the track since the time you can remember it, right?
Yeah, my dad, we raced I grew up in Central Coast of California, San Luis Obispo, and there was a dry strip in Santa Maria, and my dad, every weekend we were there, whether my dad raced or he was helping somebody, and he was kind of the local guy everybody went to, but he never did it professionally, but that's the way I grew up. I didn't have a whole lot of money to bring, to buy a ride, I guess you'd say, or to bring a sponsor. So yeah, I worked on them growing up, but I was waiting for that chance. And I was lucky because my dad growing up, whether it was motorcycles or go-karts or whatever we did, we learned how to win on just hard work and making sure our equipment was good. We didn't have the big trailers, and we didn't have the brand new, cars and engines and things like that. So that stuck with me, and as time went on, I learned more and more how to work on them, and actually traveled on the road full time as a crew member on a top alcohol dragster. And that's where my I guess that right place, right time, where a guy I met in the staging lanes in Minnesota during an oil down, and I had a talk with him, didn't even know he owned a car. I thought he was just a mechanic on a dragster. And the next day he came back and said he enjoyed our conversation and asked if I'd want to get my license in his dragster. So that's just how it started. So, yeah, I'm glad I came up that way. There's a few drivers. Del Worsham's one of them. Larry Dixon's another one that came. And actually Robert Height, who I battled for the championship, sort of came up as a crew guy before he drove. So I wouldn't trade it for the world right now. I think it's really cool that some of my best friends at the track are still crew members and not other drivers.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, something didn't have the big collars and things like that. I laughed because I was like, there's got to be a point where, I know me in my career, my dad was a blue-collar racer, and there's pictures of me at the track from the time I was 1 month old out, in the dirt, and stuff like that, my dad off-road racing. And I remember I got my own program and had all the crew guys. And there came a point where we signed our first factory program, and we had a little bit more money, and I go, all right, we've got to bring hospitality in. And I remember it was the first race, and all of a sudden we got, hospitality, and we've got like a little bit of catering, and all my guys were like, what is this? We're not eating out of ice chests anymore? And it was a shock to them. But it was one of those, I was kind of brought up the same way, where you had to earn your stripes, and every cent you accounted for, and it's like, where are we going to spend this penny and stuff like that. But there had to have been a point in your career where it was kind of the same shocking. It was like, oh, maybe I've kind of made it now, right?
Yeah, my rookie year in Top Fuel, obviously we won my rookie year at the Seattle race, which just didn't happen against the Kenny Bernsteins and Connie Colettas and all those teams that were out at the time. So that was big. Roger Prim, who the Prim name, obviously was off-roading, was the team owner of that car, and he ran it out of his pocket basically. So that was my rookie year. But from that point, Don Prudhomme called right at the tail end of that season and was watching me in that car and the way I carried myself and drove and did my interviews. And that was really the first time when I answered that phone call, and that following year started driving for the Snake, and all of a sudden now you're at a fully funded team. You're, complete backing from manufacturers. Everything is the best equipment, the best people. You're driving for one of the legendary people, going to dinner with Mario Andretti and Richard Petty and things like that that was my moment where I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm even sitting here right now, let alone driving for a guy like that. So yeah, I remember those moments, man, where, you think, wow, I might have made it. This might be it.
This might be it. Well, and, how is that? You talked about Don the Snake Prudhomme and then obviously Don Schumacher. You've driven for two of the most iconic names in drag racing history. How has that been just from a mentorship standpoint? I know you and Don are still great friends, even though you're running your program, on your own now and things like that. But, how has that been, having those type of mentors and being around those guys, throughout your career?
It's been awesome. And, they're two completely different people. And yeah, Snake and I we talk quite a bit. And in fact, when I knew I was going to become an owner, he was one of the first people I called. And I wanted to ask him if he wanted to come be involved at any point, just to hang out even, not financial, but just to get him back out to the races, being such a big name he is in our sport. And he checks on me weekly, just on anything, business-wise, any questions, any help we need. So driving for those two has been, like you said, they're two iconic names, and I'm very lucky. But even taking a step further, the crew chiefs that I've had have been like rock star hero crew chiefs in the sport for me growing up, and that's probably been more of a cooler thing, if that's even possible, of having Ed the Ace McCulloch and Roland the Hawaiian Leong, Ron Tobler, and just all these legendary people around the pit area that I've been able to work with. And I could never imagine as a kid, driving for the guy that I played with his Hot Wheels, and built his models and stuff as a kid. And Don Schumacher, I had one of his models as well that I built as a kid. So yeah, very lucky where things ended up for me career-wise.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because, you mentioned the crew chiefs and things like that, and NHRA's, it's one of those interesting things. I think there's a lot of other motorsport where, you know what I mean, you can have a car that might be a little bit less, but the driver can kind of, you know, take over. And NHRA is the weird one where you have to have a phenomenal driver such as yourself, but you've got to have a phenomenal crew chief as well. If there's one of the two parts are missing, your program just doesn't work. You know, other motorsports, sometimes one can pick up the slack for the other, but I feel like NHRA, there's this synergy where the driver and the crew chief got to be one. And I feel like, you know, that's, to me, it's what's so awesome about NHRA, because it's as much on the crew as it is on the driver.
Yeah, I just had this conversation yesterday. I've talked about it before. Our sport's unique, and you can relate, and your listeners can definitely relate, because I've talked about where, you know, you could have you could take any example, Walker Evans in off-road trucks, and I've said Mario Andretti in IndyCar, and Dale Earnhardt Sr. maybe in NASCAR, where you could have a 10th place car. If you could say this is a 10th place car, those drivers could get in. Walker Evans could get in and take that truck and probably win, but for sure get a 5th, 4th, 3rd, top 5.
Yeah.
There's just certain drivers that can do that. In our sport of drag racing, these cars are set up, especially Nitro, Top Fuel and Funny Car. They are set up to go down that track. When it leaves the crew chief's hands and they start it, in that crew chief's eyes, it is set up to run a run, whatever he put in that tune-up, that it's going to go down straight in the groove and nothing go wrong. So the driver, I can't make that run any better. There's no way I can push the pedal any harder. I can't do anything other than do my best to keep it straight and leave on time and all that. But tune-up wise, I can't make that car any better, but I can certainly make it worse. I can not leave on time. I could do a little longer burnout than I did before that changes the tune-up. I don't keep it straight, things like that. So it's a weird phenomenon where I've gotten to do a lot of other racing, and that's the first thing I learned is our jobs in drag racing as a driver is just not to mess up. And it's, we don't have an apex we missed or a corner we missed or a jump we didn't hit just right that we can say, oh man, okay, I can make it up next lap and make it better. We have to do everything perfect, or we can make the car run worse. So it's quite a bit different, and I've learned that over the years. You just got to be a machine, basically, in these nitro cars, is try to do the same thing every time over and over, and not give your crew chief something else that he's got to think about.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, though, the driver, I never, you know, I've been, you know, I've stood in the water box and things like that and watched the cars go down the strip, and it's amazing. But there was a video that you posted, and it might have been 2 years ago at this point, I can't remember, but it was something that was shot from the floorboard up, and it showed you for a run and how much you were steering and things like that. And I mean, you're going lock to lock, and I'm going, this is wild. You watch you go down the strip, and it looks like you're going straight. I didn't realize how much driving was involved. You know, it was mind-blowing to me to see how much you were working the steering wheel and what your body was doing in the car to keep that thing going in a straight line. It blows my mind how much driving is involved in NHRA, because people on the outside looking in think, oh, the car just goes straight. They just hold it to the floor. I'm like, no, you are so wrong. You know, it's pretty wild, Ron. I mean, you guys drive the hell out of these things.
Yeah, Top Fuel dragster, you don't steer them much. They're so long and flexible, and honestly, you could drive with one hand, and there were times I just held on with a couple fingers, you know, just to not overdrive them. But the Funny Car is just the most, you know, I've gotten to drive some pretty cool stuff, you know, USAC Midget, the Chili Bowl, and World Outlaws, and just a lot of cool cars. And there is nothing on the planet like a Nitro Funny Car. It is the most unpredictable 10, 11, 12,000 horsepower rocket ship, and you don't know what it's going to do. And so many times I'm in there wheeling away, sawing away at the wheel, and I'll have people at the starting line, just like you said, say, man, that was a straight run. You think, oh my God. So it's fun, like Toyota putting the visor cam, and I've run some of those HD camera glasses in my car. And like you said, we've had cameras looking back that actually show how much is going on in a Funny Car. Cause it's, on top of that, when you see that video, you see all the clutch dust that flies around. So it makes it harder to see. You're steering this little butterfly steering wheel for your life just to keep it straight. So, yeah, it's I love it. I mean, I've gotten back in a dragster a couple times, and it just seems so boring compared to a Funny Car. So I think I kind of found my home.
Yeah, well, I definitely think you found your home after the last couple of years you've had and the career you've had. But let's go back to talking about this finale because, you went in and obviously you hadn't been the points leader all year long. You went in, Robert Hite had a phenomenal year. I think, something like 8 wins this year. You might correct me if I'm wrong, but you go into that and I don't know, Ron. This was about as nail-biter as one can be. Hite got eliminated early. You come in, you want to talk about being clutch. I mean, what was going through your mind that entire day as things started playing out? Because there's so many layers to this story. And I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster. Even up in after you had the points lead, you still didn't have the championship because you still had to run in the final round. And, I mean, take me through that day and what was going on with you because, I mean, this was as mental as racing gets.
Yeah, it really started the night before. Saturday night, the last qualifying session, we were the very last pair of cars. We were maybe 6th or 7th in qualifying order. Conditions, the sun was going down on this historic Pomona track, and really conditions were about as perfect as they get for a crew chief. And my crew chief just leaned in and said, hang on, I'm throwing something at it, and I'm not sure it's going to stick, but just hang on and try to keep it straight. And we ended up going low ET, track record, all in one run, and it put us to number 1. And that run actually put us less than 2 rounds for the next day, race day, under Robert Hite. So in other words, prior to that, we would have had to go 3 rounds to beat him for a championship on Sunday. That's probably not going to happen. Yeah. I mean, 3 rounds means he'd have to go out first round. We'd have to almost win the race, which that's a great team, and they're probably not going to go out first round. So what that run did is it changed a lot of things. We also were seeing if we won, we were going to see him in the semifinals, which if we would have taken him out in the semifinals, we've won the race, we would have beat him. So still mathematically, I knew it was a long shot, but we had a chance. And first round went low ET of the all funny cars with a 3.85 second run at like 335. And so then I was like, okay, now we got something. So I knew it put the pressure on him. But when he went out second round, the quarterfinals, we had just won our quarterfinal run right in front of him. So that right away put us another round closer. And so all we had to do was win that next round. So we did not have it easy. We had unbelievable people we had to race. But that semifinal run was against Bob Tasca was so close. I wasn't sure we won it, but then they threw another wrinkle and they couldn't give me the trophy even though we were ahead when Robert lost because there's a weird rule that if you cross the center line in the final round, we would have lost 5 points and that would have cost us a championship. So people were expecting me to go out and just shut it off and coast down the track, which I probably should have. I think as an owner, probably would have fired myself as the driver for doing what I did. But I figured those fans are sitting up there, and I'm going to run it down there as far as I can. And I never saw Cruz Pedregon, so I ran it all the way to the finish line and almost touched the wall. But it still ran an unbelievable run, and it was just kind of a clincher to a great weekend. But to win it by 3 points is just unfathomable to think what we came back from and to do it like that in front of those great fans.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I guess that's what this system, the NHRA's, put in, you know what I mean, with the way things work instead of just being all season long, quote unquote, the playoffs, and we've had a lot of, motorsports kind of go to this type format, but it really produces some great racing for the fans. And I think, that's what we got this weekend. It went down to the wire and, man, it was sitting at home and you talked about that round with Tasca. I didn't know they said you won, but I watched the replay and I'm like, that's about as close as it gets. Cause visually when you guys were at the stripe, I could not tell, until they called it for you. I was like, wow. Okay. Cause I didn't know. It was close.
Yeah. They had weird camera angles and my family said the same thing. And a lot of people watching at home, you couldn't physically tell watching the TV and in the car, I can sort of hear that other car out the window, believe it or not, when they're next to me. And so you're just waiting to see this little light that's on the guardrail. And it means everything in the world to us drivers because you're just looking for that light. And it's past the finish line. So when you hit the parachutes, you glance over and look for it. And my gosh, I've never seen anything in my life that made me feel better than that little light that was on at that moment.
Yeah, that's as exciting as it gets. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the program. Obviously, you just have your first season. You're coming away with a championship. I mean, what's this off season look like? I mean, we want to say off season, but I know we've got Thanksgiving coming up and things like that. You might take a week or two off, but I know it's nose to the grindstone. You guys got to get cranking for next year. What's next year look like for you guys?
Man, again, this is my first year ownership, so I'm just trying to navigate things. And obviously, winning is great budget-wise. And I always forget. I get so engrossed in the trophy and just winning. It's kind of nice the week after you learn how much money you made and the team made. And we're pretty strong on making sure our guys do well when the car does well. And that was really important with forming the new team. So I know the guys, they got a lot of new families. Some of our crew guys have babies, and so it's important to make sure that they do well. But for us, man, I just a little bit of holidays. I'm not even thinking vacation or anything. So I can't wait to buy some new parts and just the things we're going to get to do to get ready for next year. But I'm going to head to PRI show and do some stuff there. Head to Indianapolis and then get through the holidays and start preparing. Next year is a pretty weird thing because we won't start the season at the Winter Nationals in Pomona. It's actually going to start in March at the Gator Nationals in Florida, and that will be the kickoff race. And then everything will come out west, and we'll do Phoenix, Pomona, and Vegas as sort of a West Coast swing to start the year. So a pretty historic change for the start of an NHRA season, and I'm pretty excited about it. Gator Nationals is such a huge race, so I think it'll be cool to start the season that way.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those sometimes nice, and NASCAR's kind of started tweaking on their schedule a little bit and saw NHRA's schedule come out, and I go, oh, this is kind of cool. This is something different. Sometimes different is good, and I think having that West Coast swing might actually save a few bucks, with stuff going back and forth across the country and things like that. But, talking about being, a year one, owner/driver. I mean, how was this year for you from a stress standpoint? I mean, you've always been highly involved with your programs, but this year, obviously, being an owner driver, what was the stress level compared to years previous when, you mainly had to concentrate on driving?
Last year was the worst, I thought, until I went through this year. When we went through the countdown last year, I had known that I was going to venture out, starting with our Indianapolis race Labor Day, leading into our playoffs last year. I had already knew that I was going to make the move. I told Don Schumacher I wasn't coming back as a driver. I wasn't even sure if I had a major sponsor or who was going with me, but we fought through the countdown with all that white noise in my head. And I still can't believe some of the moments that we had to win the world championship with that going on and behind the scenes. And a lot of people didn't know. The rumor got out, but nobody really knew until PRI after the season. We announced it for sure. So I kind of got used to that stress, I think. And then this year, I made a couple mistakes early in the year, lost in hole shots, one of them to John Force, because I sat in the car and I started thinking about the business side of things as a team owner, and that was a major mistake, and it distracted me a little bit, and that cost me. So it was a fight for me to make sure that didn't happen again throughout the rest of the year. So I'm not sure, answering your question, I just feel like the stress level has just been sort of the same, which I've gotten used to. And I think it's natural. I mean, sure, Rick Hendrick and you go down the list of Roger Penske and all these guys, the fun part for me is talking to them about when they started in their career in their first team and what they went through. And it's such a parallel for me to hear that I'm not the only one that's stressed out. And, having a team, it's there's a lot of things that you think about Monday through Friday, but when you got to get ready for the races, as an owner and a driver, you definitely got to, get that stuff out of your brain. So it's a work in progress. Obviously we did okay this year getting through it. But that was probably the hardest thing for me stress wise, is just separating the two.
Yeah. Well, and, let's talk a little bit about Napa, because I was looking at something, and I think this year was your 15th consecutive year with Napa, I believe. But I started thinking about it, Ron, and that's got to be one of the longest running motorsport sponsorships with a driver currently that I can think of. I mean, they've been with you for a long time.
Yeah. And we had a sort of a new regime come in last year in the motorsports area, but in that whole department. actually like 3 women came in from Coca-Cola, and a lot of the teams and a lot of the people weren't sure what was going to happen. As any sponsor, any sponsored, racer, driver, whatever, will tell you when there's new people come into a company, you just don't know. Of course, they sponsored Alexander Rossi in IndyCar and Chase Elliott, my teammate in NASCAR, and quite a few other teams, Brad Sweet and World Outlaws. So, but the cool thing was, the first time I flew to corporate headquarters, they just raved about all the good things that all the Napa store owners and the auto carriers across the country, and we're talking 6,000 plus stores that are owners, that are people in their neighborhood that own these. They're not chains, they're not franchises. So they just bragged about all the good stuff that came, what people were saying about me and our program and how much they loved us. So that was a huge relief. And gosh, it was so great to have that right before PRI last year, to get that phone call from Marty Walsh, who she took over at Napa Auto Parts, and Kevin Herron, who's the president, to tell me that they wanted to be on my car as a team owner like I had been. And they wanted me to be the Napa guy. And as you know, to know that you're going to have the funding, first of all, but to know you're going to have a sponsor like Napa that's going to continue on was, man, I broke down. It was such an emotional moment. So, so happy. And then of course, Toyota came on board right after that. And that was another moment that I'll never forget. That was just emotional for me to know that people were taking a chance on me as a team owner in my first year. And, Napa being a long running sponsor, it's been fantastic, but I get up every morning trying to be better at representing them and what I can do better on the racetrack and off the racetrack. So it's been a great relationship, and we got a few more years, luckily, with them.
Yeah. Well, I know off season, it was funny. I was in Hollywood here a couple days ago, and I had dinner with a couple of friends of mine, and one I know is a mutual friend of yours, but BC Vaught and Sid from Slipknot. And Sid was immediately, hey, did you see my boy Caps? And, and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, dude, I was watching it. It was just funny that, you can be with some of the biggest rock stars in the world, and it comes back to iRacing and things like that.
Yeah.
But, I just laugh because I'm sitting here with Sid from Slipknot, and we're talking about drag racing, and we're talking about iRacing. It's a conversation nobody would ever thought you would be talking about when you're having dinner with Sid. But obviously, iRacing is a big part of your life. I know any chance you get, you're sitting on the sim. You've been doing a lot of our events, stuff like that. So, any plans to get behind the wheel a little bit, in the rig here coming up?
Yeah, I got to do my updates. I've been gone for a few weeks, and boy, this year it cut into my iRacing. So I'm hoping this wintertime I can have some more fun, and I could almost write a book. And I'm sure you and a lot of people, when COVID happened, on our iRacing experiences, because it was weird to actually get paid by certain people to race and to do it on live TV during COVID. It was insane to get up in the morning and actually have an itinerary of races I needed to get on and practice in different cars or off-road trucks or road race or whatever it was. It was such a fun time. And we had a group of people, and Sid from Slipknot's one of them, of these people that would race together. And you felt like you were bonding because we were on the sim so much during COVID. God, it was a lot of fun. I relished that. And I thank God that we had it through COVID. It would have driven me, probably I would be divorced, because it definitely saved my marriage, because I could go out and get on the sim and just, and have fun racing. So I'm looking forward to get on. And hopefully I can get some more off-road truck racing. I know Cameron and all you guys have been watching some of your stuff, and a little jealous I can't get on. So I'm looking forward to spending some time.
Yeah, I'll get with you on the side. I know I was just in meetings in New York with CBS Sports, and we're back on to have the races on television and stuff like that. So I'll get with you on some timing, and I know we got Pastrana and those guys interested. And I think Sid's actually going to get into the off-road trucks. He's going to do this next year, and and he goes, well, I don't want to race against all you guys. Oh, we got Caps in there and everything else. He goes, so we get to talk trash. I go, yep. He goes, I'm in. So I think we got Sid,
a lot of trash talking.
Yeah, we got Sid roped into the off-road trucks this year, so it should be fun. But before we let you go, I wanted to ask. I mean, obviously you'd mentioned you've been behind the wheel. You've raced Chili Bowl. Obviously, did Outlaws. I mean, how did things how did that? I mean, you grew up in drag racing circles. How did these other doors open, Ron? And how did you learn to drive things other than a drag race car? How did those doors open? And I mean, you're a very competent driver in just about anything. How did those doors start opening?
I was such a huge fan. My dad, I told you that a lot of people went to him to help make their cars faster. It wasn't just drag racing. So where we grew up, we had Santa Maria had a circle track, a Tascadero at the time did, and we'd go to the Central Valley, and my dad would build sprint car motors for people back in the day, and we'd go help. So I've always been a fan of whatever, all types of racing, but the chances to get to drive really started when my career, I'm obviously driving for Snake. I got to when you drive for a guy like Snake, you get a lot of these doors that open, but really it was hanging out. Selzy and I would hang out with Tony Stewart a lot, and we would do these charity races, sometimes in late models, and that started the relationship with Tony Stewart a long time ago that I had. And I'd go run, like I ran the Chili Bowl with him and Lasowski. Kenny Schrader was my teammate, Josh Weiss, and that started the dirt racing sort of passion on the side when I was doing that with Tony Stewart. And then he the first year of the Prelude to the Dream, I got invited, which was, people looked at him crazy for inviting a drag racer, but I got to run that every single year they had it, and that was a blast. And I thank Tony all the time, because I would go practice during the season at other racetracks, smaller events, and we'd have a Ron Capps night at Hanford Speedway or wherever it might be, Bakersfield, and I'd get some time in the late model to practice for the Prelude. But it was such a blast. And then, getting to run a World Outlaw car a couple times, it just was being a fan that started it, and really having, Tony Stewart probably helped get a lot of those doors open with other dirt racing and things. So once people that kicked off, the IROC people, before IROC went away, I got to go test with them at Talladega and Chicagoland Speedway. Got to run around Jimmy Johnson and Castro Neves and just some of these people I looked up to, and I'm out there running in an IROC car with them. And unfortunately, IROC went away, but I was looking forward to doing something like that. But just to answer your question, just a fan of that, and just being at the right place, right time, and getting a chance to jump in and was a dream. So yeah, it was some great times.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Tony Stewart, and your friendship, but how big is it for NHRA to have that new blood come in with team ownership and that new influx of cash, for the future of drag racing? Obviously, you've got your own team now. We got AB with his own team, but how important do you think that is, and guys like Tony coming in and making that investment, and you and AB starting your own teams for the future of NHRA?
Yeah, it's huge. Years ago, obviously Joe Gibbs was involved with drag racing, had the McDonald's teams, Top Fuel and Funny Car. Rick Ware, NASCAR guy, came in, who I just had a conversation with at the awards banquet Monday night. And Tony Stewart, it's been, all those years at Selzy and I was running his dirt races, and we were always trying to get him into to come over and just make a test run in one of our cars. And he looked at us like, there's no way I'm getting in a funny car. Well, fast forward, and our mutual friend John Perdome actually set up Leah and Tony on a kind of not a blind date, I guess a blind date of sorts. And they ended up hooking up and getting married. So the first time he came out to the drags, I in fact, the other day at the staging lanes, I laughed because you never saw Tony with a smile on his face at any pit area, no matter what race it was. And he just seems so relaxed, and he's enjoying the NHRA side of things. And, obviously the fans don't get close to the NASCAR drivers at those races. No. So you never see that interaction. And I think it took him a while to get used to fans being around him. And our fans are so respectful. They give you your space when they think you need it. And I think he's really, really taken to it, and he's enjoyed it. And obviously getting in a Top Fuel dragster and making the runs that he's gotten to make. And it's fun to see him and enjoying this part of life. And, he's still a badass, and he's still a hell of a competitor. And, I'm just happy for him to finally get a chance to try what we've been bragging about, and that is blast down the quarter mile in 3 seconds at over 330 miles an hour. And boy, he had a smile on his face the first time he did it. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, well, and I know what Travis Pastrana recently has gone out and tried to get his
Yeah.
license, and I just laugh because I'm like, man, I feel like NHRA is in such a great spot right now, and it's healthier than ever. You mentioned the fans, and the fans are amazing. I think it's definitely a great time to be involved with drag racing in the NHRA.
Yeah, Travis, I have a feeling he's going to come back. He didn't get to make all the runs, and you could tell when he left and he was done for the day, he was like, okay, I didn't, first of all, he didn't conquer it like he's used to doing. He's so good at what he does every time he jumps in something. He's a lot like Smoke. But you could tell he got the bug and had no idea something could catapult him that quick and that fast. And I don't think we've seen the end of Pastrana in drag racing. I have a good feeling he's going to come back. And I called out Tony Stewart the other night in my banquet at the awards ceremony, and I just said, "Hey, you're not a dragster guy. You don't look like a dragster guy. You look like a funny car guy." And so I told him that he needed to get in a funny car and get out of one of those dragsters. And then afterwards, him and I we had a talk, and so hopefully he's going to jump into a funny car next season, jump in Hagen's and make some runs. And then I'm excited to see what he really thinks, because it's night and day between a dragster and a funny car.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Ron, we're up against a time break, my friend, but I appreciate you taking the time. We will definitely keep you in the loop on all things iRacing, and you enjoy the holiday and your championship, buddy.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me.